All right. Morning, everyone. Hear me okay? All right. All right. Welcome, everyone. This year, we're going to get started with just going to show you a few pictures. I may have shown a couple of you these before. So this was a caravan flipped over by a tornado at Sun and Fun. Yeah. Does your liability cover boats too? Here's a fire suppression system that went off in a hangar. Yeah. Here's some turbulence. Yeah, this was small, just light turbulence. No, I'm just kidding.
You're encouraging us to stay away from turbulence.
This is a King Air that crashed into a house. Some hangar rash here. Yeah. I believe most, if not all, were. I think what happened with this one was, I want to say there was a gentleman who had the throttle pushed forward as he was starting up the aircraft, and it just lunged forward right into it. I had another guy, actually just maybe about a year ago, who was hand propping his airplane, and I can't remember, he had the mags on still, the key was in the ignition, he was hand propping the airplane, things started up, starts rolling forward, he's jumping in his airplane, trying to get in there, trying to get it to stop. It's too late at that point, it's going forward, he's hanging halfway out the airplane, and ends up running into another, I think it was like a Mooney or something that was on the field. And I want to say both of those airplanes were totaled too.
I can come closer.
Yeah, okay. I'll try to not turn away so much.
Last year,
Yeah.
remember the pilots that ran the simulator, I think it was in Wichita, and a Learjet came out of the sky or went into the simulator building and killed all the occupants of that simulation.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah. So why do we show you guys these pictures? Because it can happen to you. So doesn't matter who you are. No one has ever called our agency and said, "Hey, I need to get some insurance today because I'm going to have an accident today." I've had several owners who, have said they've been flying for 30 years and thousands of hours and never had an accident, and then all of a sudden it happens to them. And every time a guy calls in and files a claim, he always says, "I never thought it would happen to me. I never thought I would be the one to forget to put my gear down," or whatever it is. So it does happen to everyone. So it's important to take your insurance and your training seriously and not take it for granted. All right, so we're going to look through a few claim scenarios here, and you guys tell me whether there's coverage or not for some of these. So this guy didn't check the weather, and he flew into a thunderstorm. He had hail and lightning damage. Is that covered? Even though he didn't check the weather? That's right. Yes, acts of God are covered. We have a saying in insurance, there is no stupid exclusion in your policy. Yeah. I'm sure the carriers wish they could put one in there, but. Yeah. All right, your windshield cracks while in flight. Windshield covered? Okay. Yep, there's the question. Possibly. So yes, if it's sudden or uninspected impact, like a bird strike, bird strikes are covered all the time. No, if it's caused by stress or fatigue, just an old windshield that eventually fails. I've had several of these over the years and had another one recently, and the insurance companies will pull the windshield off. They'll send it to a specialized shop. They can inspect it and they can tell without a doubt what caused that crack or that failure.
So you can't take a bird and throw it in the windshield?
I mean, that might help the case. I'm not going to tell you to do that, but.
Come on, guys. Hey.
Their insurance should cover that. What if you are doing, drop something on it, you're
Yeah, that's fine, and that would be covered. So he said, what if a mechanic or somebody drops a wrench on something? It should be. Now, I will say that there's going to be coverage on your policy either way, but that's a situation where I would try to press that maintenance shop if they were, negligent and damaged it. You want them to cover it as long as they do have the coverage, because then that avoids the claim being on your policy, and then all of a sudden your premium goes up for it.
Because if they're not covered, then
you have a backup. Yeah. There are, some shops don't.
yourself, you drop the wrench, it's going to be covered.
Yeah, that's still covered too. Yep. Yeah. I've had people too. I've had guys that have come back out
Come
to
on,
their
guys.
aircraft
Listen. Be quiet.
after an overnight, and they did a post-flight inspection. There's nothing wrong. They come back, and all of a sudden there's a huge dent on the leading edge of their wing, which you would expect was probably done by maybe dropping a fuel nozzle off or something and denting the wing. But so I told the guy the same thing. You really need to get the FBO to step up and take care of this. It's it wasn't there when you landed. It's obvious they did it, and they said, "You don't have any proof. Not our problem." And so at that point you can either start racking up legal expenses and suing them, or it was like it was a small claim, so he just goes ahead and files it on his policy and gets it covered because he couldn't get the FBO to step up and cover it.
Do you guys subrogate with like FBOs in cases like that? Would you contact them?
The carrier, the adjuster, the carrier might, and they certainly do and have, and that's a real possibility if there's any proof, and also depends on how expensive it is. So if it's $5,000 to repair something, they're not going to spend the time and money going after him for $5,000. But if it's $1 million, loss, yeah, I mean, they're probably going to go back after him and try to recoup their losses. All right. Okay, so you serve alcohol to a passenger on your airplane. After the flight, he's involved in a car accident, kills another person. The victim's family sues you because you're the one who served him the alcohol. Does the aircraft policy cover this? No, nobody thinks so? Maybe. So this is one of those expansion coverages. A lot of these coverages that we're talking about here are going to be found in either that broad coverage endorsement or expanded coverage endorsement, expansion coverage. Every carrier calls it something different, but that's where you're going to find a lot of these. There's those additional kind of throw-in coverages that they want to try to beef up their policies. So if you do have host liquor liability, then there would be coverage for that type of occurrence.
But most,
You're different though.
this is something that you would talk to your agent and agree to add on, because normally it's not covered.
No, these are depending on which carrier you're with. See, every carrier's expansion endorsement has different coverages and different limits. So they're not. It's not something you necessarily have to ask for. It could already be in your policy, and you may not even know it. Correct, yeah. This is, again, we're talking about coverages that would be on the aircraft owner's policy. If the aircraft owner or insured were sued for this, it's going to defend and cover them. Yeah, right.
It's just the exposure, I guess, and the peril is somebody else bringing it, the passenger bringing his or her own alcohol on board having this happen.
Yeah, and I think if they're, let's say the victim's family didn't know. They didn't know if you served them. They didn't know if they brought their own. They weren't there, and they sued you for it. You know that you've got a defense. So the insurance company is going to appoint an aviation expert attorney to go defend you in court. And then in court, if that comes out that they brought their own, then, the judge is probably just going to throw it out at that point or something.
Thanks, Weather. So if you, let's just say you chartered a plane and there was alcohol served on it and an accident happened, would the insurance policy cover the operator of the airplane or the person who chartered it, or both, or neither? I mean, depends on what it says, but.
If you chartered an airplane, okay, now repeat the rest again.
I would say, I chartered an airplane, the company does, this happens, and is it the charter that's covered, the operator of the aircraft, the owner of the aircraft? Who's covered
Yeah.
and who's not covered?
Okay, I get you now. So, yeah, generally, when you're chartering an airplane, the charter company is going to insure all the aircraft, even if they don't own that airplane. Maybe it's a leaseback. So the charter operator insures the airplanes. They're the named insured, but you're going to add the owner of the aircraft as an additional insured, and also add, a lot of times when companies charter an airplane, they'll require that the charter company adds their company as an additional insured on there as well in case they're sued for something as well. Yep.
Lance,
Mm-hmm.
when you say an expansion, whatever, is that an option that you have to select, or is that not, I guess it's an option that, I mean, is it?
I would.
know you have that coverage when you say expansion.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of you guys in here, I mean, I certainly, we try to have that conversation ahead of time, especially if there's, maybe you got two companies who are almost the exact same price. You start looking at the expansion, okay, what's different between these? Not only, okay, the deductibles may be better over here, but let's look at the expansion coverage and see, okay, policy B has XYZ coverages that policy A doesn't have. Or maybe they both have the same coverages, but policy B's limits are double what the other company is, and it's the same price. Well, let's go ahead and go with the other company then to get you the better coverage. But to go back and answer your first question, I'd say 8 out of 10 carriers on the light aircraft side are going to have an expansion coverage of some sort already in there. There's one company I can think of off the top of my head that doesn't really do expansion coverages, and then there's another carrier that will offer it for an additional premium. Actually, I can think of two that will offer it for an additional premium. One of them, it's only like $25. The other may charge $1,000 or so. So it does just depend on the carrier, but again, 75% of the time or so, most of you probably already have an expansion coverage endorsement on your policy. It's just a matter of, I mean, there can be 20 different coverages on that one endorsement. A lot of times it's a 2, 3, 4, 5-page endorsement, so there's a lot of different coverages in there that are easy to be reviewed. Okay. All right. Jimmy Mullen just sold this guy an Aerostar. Nobody else would sell him one, but Jimmy said, "I'll take care of you."
It was a salvage.
Yeah. So he's the PIC here. He lets his friend take the controls. She porpoises down the runway, damages the landing gear, has a prop strike, all that. Is this covered? And we got yeses and nos. So probably not. Because, again, we all know there's two ways you can be approved to fly an aircraft on an aircraft insurance policy. You're either a named pilot or you meet the open pilot warranty. So if this person was neither one of those, then there's probably not going to be coverage for it. Even though she was with a qualified PIC, That's where I have this conversation a lot of times because the insurance company and the FAA don't always align. The insurance companies are typically stricter than the FAA is because they're the ones paying billions of dollars a year in claims. So yeah, this was legal per the FAA, but it doesn't mean the insurance company's okay with it. Okay, we've got some frayed wiring here and a blown tire. Coverage for these? A lot of no's. That's a good point, Jimmy. Let's say in this case, no, but we'll talk about that here in a minute. So generally, no, tires are not covered unless it's caused by fire, theft, or vandalism. And again, we all know wear and tear is not covered. Now, to Jimmy's point, if the blown tire caused the further damage, then the further damage would be covered. So probably a more, and this is something I've had happen too, you're coming in for landing and your tire blows on landing and causes you to veer off into the ditch and bend your wing up, that's covered. The resulting structural damage to the aircraft is covered, but not just a blown tire that needs to be replaced by a mechanic. All right, your airplane's going to be in the shop for repairs as a result of a covered claim. You have several trips already scheduled. Now you need to rent or charter a substitute aircraft. Is there any coverage on your policy for this? Yep, so we got, whoops. Uh-oh. Man, this skipped way ahead on me. All right. I'm going to stop using this touchpad. I'm just going to use these keys. Possibly, yes, if your policy includes extra expense for renting substitute aircraft. So this is going to be another one that's in the expansion endorsement, and I'd say it's about 50-50. I've actually seen some really good policies that don't have this particular type of coverage in it. Here's kind of some examples of what you'll see here. So it's not just, everything under the sun. There is going to be a per day limit, and there's going to be a total occurrence limit as well. These are just some examples you can see from the dollar amounts. And then there's going to be a waiting period and a maximum period. So you're going to have to wait 7 days after the covered occurrence or accident before this kicks in. And then, we all know that there's a lot of parts delays out there. Repairs are sometimes taking longer. If your aircraft's on the ground the entire year, they're not just going to continue to let you rent an airplane and pay for it for the entire year. They're going to put a maximum period on it, which, again, just an example, might be for 30 days. Now, here's the definition of extra expense, and this is important. Extra expense, keyword extra there, means the cost of leasing or renting another aircraft, which exceeds the cost you would have incurred if your aircraft hadn't been damaged. So what that means is they're basically going to reimburse you for the cost difference between the normal operating expenses of your airplane and what you incurred to rent the airplane. So if it already costs you, easy number, $1,000 a day to fly your airplane, and then it costs you $2,000 a day to rent one, there's only a $1,000 difference in there. They'll pay you for the 1,000, but not the 2.
So is that determined initially when they're writing the policy, or is that a decision later on?
What the operating expenses are? That would be something you would discuss with the adjuster after the claim. Yeah.
After the claim. Okay.
So you have to have documentation to prove that.
Yeah, I guess that would, I don't know if they're going to really get that deep into it, but you would just discuss with them and kind of show them, generally, this is what I pay to operate the aircraft, and, they're going to work with you at that point.
My policy has $1,000 a day up to a total of $10,000.
There you go.
It's good for 60 consecutive days.
All right, your airplane was damaged during landing away from your home base. You and your passengers have to stay in a hotel for the night and buy tickets on an airline to get home. Any coverage for this? You can see kind of a trend here, another maybe. So this coverage is called trip interruption expenses. So must be a covered occurrence, which means, again, if you just happen to land at another airport to refuel and all of a sudden your engine doesn't start back up, that's not a covered claim. There's been no occurrence, there's been no damage to the airplane. That's just a maintenance wear and tear issue. But if you come in for landing and you know, it's a gear up or prop strike or whatever it is and you can't fly the plane, then this is going to kick in, and again, it's going to reimburse you for reasonable expenses for food, lodging, and travel of passengers from place of occurrence to your final destination or back to the place of origin. And again, reasonable.
Each passenger. So you got a good policy.
Oh, okay, good. It is, again, reasonable expenses here, so that doesn't mean you're going and staying at the Ritz and ordering lobster every night and everything, but you know, they'll take care of you here. That was specifically for Joel. All right, you've got $50,000 of spare parts in your hangar that get damaged or stolen. Any coverage for this? It depends, maybe. Yep. This is the spare parts coverage. So if you've got spare parts coverage in your policy, it does include engines, parts, avionics, and accessories. There's going to be a total occurrence limit. There is a deductible for this particular type of coverage. And it's going to be secondary to any other available policies. So generally, your first line of defense for property is going to be on a property policy. So some of you, even if you don't, I guess I'll say first, if you own your hangar, you have to insure the hangar. If you lease your hangar, the airport or the owner is the one insuring that. So if you own your hangar and you have to insure it, you can get property coverage or spare parts coverage on your hangar policy just thrown in there. So if you do have that, that's going to be the first line of defense where you're going to go for your property coverage is on your hangar policy. But if you don't have a property policy, then this is available as a backup. All right, you depart your home base at 5 p.m. You don't arrive at your destination as scheduled. ATC lost radar contact an hour earlier, and a search for your airplane begins. Is there any coverage for this? Okay, so this is your search and rescue coverage. We'll pay for costs of search and rescue, but only after governmental and military search and rescue operations have been discontinued, and there's obviously a maximum limit on this one as well. All right, you have an engine failure, you have to put it down in a field. Your gear collapses, you have a prop strike. Is this covered? Okay, yep, it's an easy one. Now, what about the cost of transporting the damaged aircraft to the maintenance shop? Those are covered too? So yes, those are covered, but the kind of a note here, the cost of the repairs plus the transportation costs can't exceed the value of your aircraft. So if that happens, they would just total it out and write you a check for whatever the value on the aircraft is. Yes, yes. All right, now what if you, same instance, but you landed in the field and there was no damage to the airplane? Now, there's nothing to cover here, but let's say that the field was too small, it was inadequate, you couldn't repair it there, you couldn't take back off out of that field. Now you got to disassemble the airplane, load it up on a trailer, move it back to the repair shop. Is there any coverages for that? So that's another maybe. That's your off-airport landing expenses. So if you've got off-airport landing expenses, even though there's no claim, even though there's no damage, there could be some expenses or reimbursement available for you there.
So once again, these are all options that you have to select or
No, so it just depends on if you have an expansion coverage or not, but you don't really get to pick and choose. Go through all 20 available coverages and say, I want that one, but not that one, that one, but not that one. It's just the carrier develops this endorsement with the coverages that they will provide, and they'll offer it to you. But yeah, it's not a la carte. You can't take off some and add others. So it could be different between, right.
Not a la carte.
Right. So it's going to be different between, and depending on which carrier you're with, as to which coverages they offer and what the limits are of those coverages.
Yeah, Lance, mine was through U.S. Specialty, and it has all of them.
Yeah.
The one you described.
Good. Yeah, generally, I would say U.S. Specialty does. They have a good broad expansion coverage endorsement. And, a lot of you guys in here, U.S. Specialty has always been, one of the most competitive Aerostar markets for many, many years now. I'd venture to say at least 50% of you might, in this room, might be with them already. So. All right, so what did we learn? So, do you know if you have the coverages in your policy? Jack does now. Again, it can happen to you, so take insurance and training seriously. This was literally the flight home after a owner's conference just like this one. This guy probably didn't think this was going to happen to him either.
Citations
Yeah.
can't swim.
Citation overrun, yeah.
So what coverage is that?
Just the aircraft policy. Yeah. Yeah, that's just your general hull coverage right there. Yeah.
What about taking them out of the water, take the wings off?
That would, that would be going back to that same example of the engine failure in the field. They're going to pay for that transportation.
What about any environmental cleanup?
Yeah, it is, and generally pollution is excluded on aircraft policies. There are pollution policies available. Generally, I really see FBOs and airports who are providing fuel really have a lot of exposure for that. I see them getting pollution policies a lot, but not so much on the aircraft side, but it is available, and that's a good question, yeah.
We had one where an airplane crashed on the field and dumped 15 gallons of bad gas. It was $100,000 cleaned up.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It doesn't take much to run a huge bill.
Yeah. Especially if you have a stream or something nearby. They can get pretty.
We dug halfway to China because it's a sniffer of the dirt that keep going down.
Mm-hmm.
All that dirt has to get canned and sent to a recycler to be burned.
Right.
Burn the dirt, basically.
Yeah.
$100,000.
All right. Let's spend a couple minutes giving you guys a market update. So, I was telling, I think, a couple of people last night that this is kind of a good time to be talking about this because the market has continued to change and get better just even since the beginning of the year. So if we'd be talking about this in January, I'd probably be telling you something different. But it is, we are seeing trends that everything is continuing to get better. And a lot of that may have to do with we've got 4 new aviation carriers here in the past 1 to 2 years.
Competition.
Yep. More carriers, more competition equals better rates for you. 3 out of these 4 carriers can insure Aerostars. It depends on a case-by-case basis whether or not they're going to be competitive on it or not. But I've got Aerostars with all 3 of these new carriers we're talking about. I've got different Aerostars with them. The 4th one, they literally are brand new as of like a month ago. Wow. So they're not quite there. They're basically starting with single engine piston aircraft, fixed gear. Then they're gonna kind of stair step their way up. They're gonna add in retracts, then twins, turboprops, etc. So I don't know yet if they'll be an Aerostar market, but once they start adding some twins, which I would expect wouldn't be any longer than 6 months or so, we'll have a better idea at that point. But
Venco's writing again, but they're not competitive, at least when I've checked.
yeah,
They're writing again, but they really aren't.
yeah, right.
Lance, when you say carrier, do you mean underwriter?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I generally, the proper term is underwriting company. I generally just say carrier just to kind of try to keep it simple, because yeah, I mean you're going to have. Yeah, and a lot of times, it depends on which company you're working with, but the underwriting company may also be the carrier who the paper is on, who's, got the finances and the money behind the scene. Other times, the underwriter may be underwriting for a separate carrier who it's on their paper and they're really the one fronting it, and the underwriter is there to underwrite the account and try to make them money. So it... Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I usually just try to keep it simple and just go by carrier. You have myself, the broker, and then the underwriter or carrier that you're with.
We were talking yesterday, about the price. Every time I have a birthday, they increase my price about $1,000.
So you're telling me they've been giving you a present every year and you're upset about it?
When you break 100, Roger, you're done.
So we were talking to you about going liability only, and the part that you explained, I didn't understand really until you laid it out. I don't know where to cut off where we're talking about only insuring the airport that requires you to have insurance, covering their damage, or if we run the airplane into somebody else's building, and but I'm still trying to decide, what area do I pick? So I've got good enough coverage, and the price is reasonable.
Yeah.
You explained it yesterday, but if you could explain it again, maybe I'll get it better this time.
Okay. So I guess the gist of our conversation yesterday was there seems to be some confusion out there between airport premises liability and liability only on your aircraft. So if you get liability only on your aircraft, that means the whole value, or the aircraft itself is not covered, but you are still covered for any bodily or injury or property damage that is caused to others by the use of your aircraft. So that includes flight coverage. And there is another policy available if you didn't want to continue purchasing your aircraft policy that's just strictly an airport premises liability policy, just covering you on the ground at the particular airport for any bodily injury or property damage there. But again, no taxi, no flight coverage. That's really just, we think of that as kind of a slip and fall coverage. If you started a fire and you burned up an airplane next to you, that would be an example. Or if you've got a guest in your hangar and they slip and fall, or they're getting under your airplane and they lift their head up and hit the prop and it splits their head open or something like that, those kind of things would be covered on the airport grounds, but just no flight-related coverage. But the thing that I told Roger yesterday too is I usually don't see that there's really much of a premium savings going with just that airport premises liability route. Those policies are going to be at least $1,000 to $2,000 on their own, and there's there's no flight coverage. But if you bought liability only on your aircraft policy, it's probably going to be about the same premium, and you've got the flight coverage too, So you've got a lot more coverage on the aircraft policy for your airplane, because typically that premises liability for the airport is already included on the aircraft policy, and you're almost paying the same amount of money anyway, so.
I shopped it this year, because obviously, with the birthday Thursday, it turned 73, they let me have some more money. So when I asked to get quoted from the broker two different ways, one was liability with full coverage, as I've always had all these years, especially, and then just not in motion, figuring that the base exposure is when it's on the ground, not flying, because it's spent most of its life there. And it was about, off the top of my head, liability was about $2,000. The full coverage was $7,000, so it's basically $5,000 for the hull
Mhm.
motion.
Mhm.
And if I dropped it to not in motion, the hull went from 5,000, part of the premium, down to like 1,800.
Mhm.
And no, I didn't do it. I bought full coverage this year, but I'm honestly looking at basically going basically naked.
Yeah.
Hull coverage in the air, keeping it on the ground.
Mhm.
That's where, it's where most exposure is anyhow. It's sitting there if something happens to it.
Yeah.
And the liability will cover me flying as well as if my plane catches fire and burns a hanger down kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right. And that's one thing that a lot of people don't understand either, is they think that if they're buying a ground not in motion policy for the aircraft whole, that means the liability is only on the ground as well. But the whole coverage to the airplane and the liability are two separate coverages. So you can be covered for flying under the liability, but only be covered on the ground for the aircraft.
Lance, is there any aircraft out there, home-built, experimental production airplane out there that any of your underwriters will not insure, but not taking the qualifications of the pilot into consideration?
You're saying, will they still insure it without actually quoting?
Excluding the pilot experience, is there physically an airplane out there, Cessna, Piper, Pilatus, home-built, experimental, that any of the underwriters will not insure? Just say, hey, I don't care if you got 10
Oh, yeah, okay, I see. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. There's I tell you what, I've been doing this a long time now, and I kind of, you get to the point where it's like you think you've seen everything, but you never do. And still, here I am the other day, people call in, and I'm like, I've never heard of this airplane in my life. There's a lot of experimental European aircraft that are just being built, that are getting imported over to the U.S. And a lot of those, there's no history yet. And so the carriers won't insure them because they don't know anything about the airplane yet. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of those out there.
So the moral of the story is make sure that you check with your insurance agent before you go out and purchase.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Whatever, your reason for purchasing something.
Yeah.
The Lancer 4 was very difficult to get insurance.
Yeah, it is. The Lancers, there's only really, I think, a couple of carriers left who will insure those. They've had a lot of fatal accidents because of that. I think it's the laminar wing is basically, from what I understand, I mean, I've never flown one, but I did some research on them a little bit ago. And basically, if you get into a spin, it's almost unrecoverable from what they say.
There was a stall spin accident in Oshkosh, with Lancer or a Lancer, one of the two.
Yeah. Yeah.
One last question, Lance. On the liability where you're covering people or damage to the building on the ground when you're flying, one of the requirements of the pilot, right now I've got to have recurrent training every year.
Yeah.
Medical every year. Does that change any?
No, I mean, not in an Aerostar, unfortunately. Kind of like we talked about yesterday, a lot of you, let's say your Aerostar is worth $200,000, but you've got $1 million of liability. So just dropping the whole coverage doesn't all of a sudden mean that there's no exposure to the insurance company. They've still got $1 million on the line out there, and that can be used up pretty quickly if there's serious bodily injury or fatalities, and you got a really nice home that was damaged. I mean, that can get used up pretty quickly. So even if you don't buy whole coverage, they still want you to train in the airplane every year.
And in that same vein, Lance, have you heard of somebody gets injured and the family sues for $10 million, right? You guys quit paying $1 million, right? It's over then. Has anybody ever required waivers to ride an airplane, or how do other people deal with this, or what do you tell us to protect ourselves above that $1 million policy?
Yeah. I'll answer that a couple of different ways. Yes, there are people, there are passenger liability waivers out there. I'm sure you can, Google them and probably find some examples. We may have some. I'd have to take a look. But, the thing about those passenger liability waivers are that if I if I got in your airplane and I signed a waiver and I was killed, my wife didn't sign the waiver. She can still sue you. So, you know, it doesn't, it may not really help that much, you know. What's that?
Don't keep the waiver in the plane.
Yeah, yeah. There may not be a waiver if it's in the plane. Yeah,
Being somewhere where somebody
yeah, yeah.
Always take the wife with you.
Yeah, anytime you're carrying a friend, tell them they have to bring their wives.
$50 is $50.
Yeah, yeah. But you know, I have had a few of you out there though that there could be higher liability limits available. One, with maybe even with the same carrier you're with, but it's going to be for a higher premium, obviously. So, and we can quote that, and you can decide how much you're really willing to pay for it. But there is also excess liability policies as well. So I've had a lot of guys who have bought excess liability policies where if you get $1 million smooth, you have to have a smooth limit first. You can't have that passenger sub limit. If you get a smooth limit on the primary policy, there's carriers who might offer an additional $2 million on top of that. That'll get you up to $3 million, you know. But on a piston airplane, it's difficult to get very high up there. I mean, I'd say that's probably about the max you're going to be able to find. You know, potentially if there was a carrier who would do $2 million smooth on it, and you could get another $2 million on top, maybe you could get up to $4 million. But again, they really try to keep the exposure down on piston aircraft. Whereas if you had a turboprop or a jet, even single pilot, you can get $10 million, and you know, so there's higher limits available on turbine aircraft.
So if you have an excess liability, let's just say it's based on your homeowner's policy. I mean, a lot of times that's the way it is. What you're talking about, right?
No, the homeowners, your personal umbrella stuff, that's going to exclude aviation. This is a very specific excess liability policy only for the airplane. So it's not going to also provide excess coverage if some kid drowns in your pool or something, you know.
So it's excess liability on your aircraft liability policy.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Lance, going back to the no-hull insurance or liability only and instructors, all of us will only fly as an instructor if we are named insured with waiver subrogation. So in Roger's case, it drops.
There would be no waiver of subrogation available because,
so we're not
yeah.
going to fly. So
Yeah.
you're not going to get an AOA insurance approved instructor to fly.
Mm-hmm.
What's the advantages to an instructor versus just being under the general open pilot warranty?
Guarantees coverage. Well, the other one, you have your passport, and how you're covered, and go fight in court over it. You always want to be named.
Well, you know, the simple answer is if you're flying under the open pilot warranty, there may not be a difference between being a named pilot and flying under the open pilot warranty. But where they get their coverage at is that additional step of being added as an additional insured with a waiver of subrogation. That's where you know for sure the insurance company is saying you have a certificate that says we are going to also cover Eric Reese and we're not going to subrogate against him. If you don't have that, then just being a named pilot on the policy doesn't necessarily guarantee you any type of coverage. And in fact, instructors, if you don't have the additional insured, anybody in the business of aviation is going to be excluded from the coverage anyway because they expect that you have your own coverage. If you operate a commercial business, whether it's a mechanic or a flight school or whoever it is, they're not just going to go covering every single person you do business with because they expect they're already going to be covered. So they're going to exclude them. But if you are added back as additional insured with a waiver of subrogation, it's going to supersede that exclusion, and they're going to have all the coverage that they require or need. Does that make sense?
Does that raise the cost of the policy?
Generally not. You know, on occasion I've seen a couple that, one I can think of is there's a couple of carriers who they will not charge if they're only added to the policy for a 7-day period only for the training, but if you want to be on there for the entire year, they'll charge a couple $100 or something. But again, that's a rare case. I'd say I can only think of 2 companies right now that would really charge for that. 8 out of 10 carriers are going to add the instructor and cover them for no additional premium.
Okay, I guess that kind of begs the question. So are all the owners' policies are paying for all the pilots that we have for training? Somebody that's an instructor, like, do you guys carry instructor insurance?
It's expensive, but it really doesn't cover much. Lance and I talked about this a lot. It's like for us, it's like it's not worth it.
Okay, so a lot of most instructors don't carry a policy, so you need to have this, so basically,
Yeah.
okay.
How does the underwriter handle when they require you to get return training? Obviously, you're going to have an instructor. But if you've got a liability only policy, how do they tie this into it? You're required to have an instructor.
Uh-huh.
Who's going to cover him? Where do they decide who pays for that or how that works?
I don't know, I guess I'm not understanding your question completely.
He's saying liability only policy is what he carries, but because he has to have an annual current training, how does he then insure the pilot, the instructor? Is that correct?
Right, that's right.
Oh, yeah.
The insurance I've got now, the underwriter has approved the trainer that we use all the time. Now, if we drop if we go down to liability only, does that wipe out that clearance for the instructor?
No, not at all. And if you're liability only, you can still get additional insured for the instructor. So when we're talking about additional insured with a waiver of subrogation, that's 2 separate pieces there. Additional insured means that basically the aircraft owner is extending their liability coverage to the instructor as well for bodily injury or property damage. That's not the airplane itself. That's just for if you all have an accident, you damage property, you hurt somebody, and you're sued, the owner is sued, the instructor is sued, both of you are covered under the liability. The other piece is the value of the aircraft itself, and that's where the waiver of subrogation comes into play, where they say, okay, if you have hull coverage and we pay you for damage to your airplane, if we feel the instructor was at fault, we can subrogate and go after him and try to recoup our damages. But if they have a waiver of subrogation, they're saying we're waiving our right to do that. We're not going to go after that instructor for damage to the airplane. So again, if you just have liability only, there's no subrogation that's going to take place because the airplane isn't covered anyway, so they're not going to give you that waiver of subrogation.
But if the instructor doesn't have a policy anyway, then the waiver of subrogation doesn't mean anything.
The instructor doesn't have to have a policy for the waiver of subrogation to matter. I mean, even if the instructor doesn't have a policy, he can still be sued and subrogated for damage in the airplane.
Oh, it could be individually.
Yeah. So, as well as any pilot who's flying somebody else's airplane. It doesn't just have to be an instructor. So, but again, if they have the waiver, they won't go after him. But whether the instructor or whatever other pilot is flying the airplane has their own coverage or not, doesn't matter. It has no bearing. If they feel like you were negligent and you were at fault for damage in the airplane, they have the right to go after that pilot. Jimmy?
A guy asked me a question the other day, and I'm not sure. If I sell a guy an airplane, and he doesn't have a medical and wants to sit left seat, and the pilot that's sitting right seat has a medical and a license and is insured in the airplane, is the guy that owns the airplane covered?
The guy who owns the airplane was the one who didn't have the medical?
Has no medical.
Okay.
He wants to sit left seat.
Uh-huh.
So he wants to bring another pilot with him. He sits right seat, it has a license and a medical and is insured in the airplane.
Is this a Part 91 operation?
Yes.
Well, that can go a couple of different ways, because there's a few things that are at play there. One, do we have the main PIC who's in the right seat? Is he approved on the policy? You know, so yeah, he's approved, so he's flying the airplane. Now, no, I mean,
Not the
obviously,
Aerostar.
most PICs are going to sit in the left seat, but technically it doesn't, you know, there's no language in the policy that says you have to be, which seat you're going to be in. But then, you know, your couple of other questions are, okay, is the owner of the aircraft really flying the airplane? You know, is he just sitting there and working the radios and logging some duel? You know, okay, maybe you don't, that's not much of a case there, but if he's still, going back to our other slide about, you know, the guy you sold an airplane to, it doesn't matter if he's with a qualified PIC or not, he has to be approved to fly the airplane. So if he's touching the controls, if the owner's flying the airplane, he has to be approved to do so. And the insurance company is probably not going, I mean, you could, I think there's a way you could probably get it written with the insurance company that says, okay, this guy has a lapsed medical, and but he's only going to fly dual only with this guy. You know, maybe you could get that done. You know, I don't want to promise that. I guess it's something that I would ask the carrier or the underwriter, and it's possible you could get it done. And then the other thing goes back to okay, well, what's the accident? What's the cause of the loss? So, was it medical related? So, did this guy have a heart attack or something while he was flying, and he didn't have a medical? Well, yeah, that might be grounds to where they say, we're not going to cover that. The guy didn't have a medical, and then he had a medical issue. But if it's, you know, the guy didn't have a medical, and you're taxiing along the runway, and there's a pothole or something, well, that has nothing to do with whether he had a medical or not. You know, so you can see there's 4 different ways you can, that's a loaded question.
So apparently the guy, if he wants to fly the airplane, he needs to talk to you to find out if the guy in the right front seat will be covered.
Yeah, and, you know, I'd say maybe half the carriers out there, we need to tell them who the owner is anyway. So they're going to want to know, even if it's in a holding company, they're going to want to know, okay, who really is this pilot? Because if they know that the owner is a pilot, they've seen this stuff all the time. So you have an owner who's a pilot who is the sole member of the LLC and owns the airplane, but he's a private pilot with 100 hours, and he was going to buy the airplane because he wanted to get his multi-engine and IFR in it, and he doesn't want to put himself as a named pilot on the policy because he knows how much the premium is going to be. So then he tries to just go add his CFI on there and try to skirt the system a little bit. They've seen that 100 times. So whenever they go to quote an account, they're going to ask who are the owners, and then you got to say, okay, here's this guy, and then they're going to start asking more questions because they're going to find him in the FAA database. And okay, we see this guy's a pilot now. What's his experience? You know, and they're going to want to have him fill out a pilot form, and he's going to pass on his info showing he has no multi-engine, he has no IFR, and he has no medical, and they're probably going to say, no thanks.
One last. Is basic med, I mean, they're expanding the things with basic med. Is that going to be an issue for any of us? And then literally liability issue.
There's,
Only you, Roger.
What's that?
Only you.
I knew that answer.
there's only one carrier I've seen that had an issue with basic med, but I'll also say that it's probably going to depend on age. So generally for an Aerostar, anybody under 70 is going to be fine with basic med, and probably even 75. Once you start getting up into the late 70s and the 80s, you might start seeing an insurance company say, no, we're not going to accept basic med anymore. You need to go get an actual medical, and maybe you need to do it every year or something like that. You know, so it depends on the carrier, and it is going to be age related too.
We've got a couple of minutes left. Anybody else have any questions?
Yep, I got one over here. So as a prospective buyer, and I'm hearing all sorts of insurance, I've never owned a plane, but I have friends, and so it sounds kind of spooky.
me sometimes, but what's some advice I should be doing as a new owner or a potential owner looking for insurance? And then maybe if you could hit on something like, let's say if somebody, bought a Malibu or Meridian, let's make it the Piston, and maybe they paid $1 million. But then if there's a Meridian that you bought for $900,000, that's a turboprop. I'm just trying to give the two engine power plant differences. Is there a difference in insurance? It kind of sounds like because it's a turboprop, it costs more. However, turboprops might statistically be safer.
Yeah.
So how does the insurance industry kind of play that game of how they pick a price?
Yeah, in general, turbine aircraft are going to have better rates from a percentage standpoint than the piston aircraft, but it does depend on the value, So if you had a $1 million piston airplane and a $2 million turboprop, even though the turboprop on a percentage basis gets better rates, it's still going to cost more because it's worth $1 million more. So the value obviously comes into play there. And the other thing is it just depends on, a lot of carriers are going to want to see a lot more total time for a turbine airplane as opposed to a piston, so they're going to be looking for, and there's a couple of carriers, if you're under 1,000 hours, it can certainly still be done. But I'd say the majority of carriers at this point who are going to be competitive and quoting something like a Meridian, they're going to be looking for a minimum of 1,000 total time. Whereas on the piston side, not so much. So it depends on where you're at with your flying as well. And then, your other question just in general about what you can be doing and everything, it really just depends on your experience. The easy answer is fly an airplane, continue to build experience, fly a twin. If you're looking to get into an Aerostar, go rack up as many multi-engine hours as you can. Because it's going to help you out more in the long run from a premium standpoint, the more multi-engine time you have going up into an Aerostar.
Right, well, there's a part of me that wants to call different insurance people, but not tell them about me. It's like, well, what if this? And then I can kind of, because you're all trying to make money, and it just seems like, and I've also heard, well, once you kind of spill your guts to one insurance guy, then you kind of lose leverage with other brokers or whoever.
Yeah, you got to be careful that you're very specific about what you're asking them for and the information you're giving them, because they can take your information and go block the marketplace. And then when you call me later because he wasn't able to get you a good quote, now there's nothing I can do for you because he's already blocked up all the markets. So that's a real thing, and you should be careful. But why don't we just let's talk more about it here at lunch or something.
Yeah, Lance will be available for lunch and this afternoon as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay. One last question for Lance. Insurance underwriters and suspicious claims, i.e. Coming out of Canada, think I got fuel contamination, fly over 5 different airports, land in a 600-foot deep lake, with a life raft and a baggie for my cell phone, and knowing that the logbooks burned up in a hangar in Danbury, Connecticut, and I don't like Jim Christie. Would we ever
pass?
Pass?
Pass.
I mean, this is real. This happened.
Ken, I think we're out of time.
Yeah. And this last one, it's suspicious too. The one with the wind shear. Reason being that pilot was on probation with his airline job, right? As I understand it, due to mental health reasons. So, did they ever investigate stuff like this? They ever look into the pilot and what he was up to or what he was doing?
You mean before the claim or after?
After the claim?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the adjuster's gonna, do some digging and find out exactly everything that happened.